Everyone is an ocean inside every individual walking the street. Everyone is a universe of thoughts and insights and feelings, but every person is crippled in his or her own way by our inability to truly present ourselves to the world. Life just doesn't care about our aspirations or sadness. It's often random, and it's often stupid, and it's often completely unexpected, and the closures and the epiphanies and revelations we end up receiving from life, begrudgingly, rarely turn out to be the ones we thought. Nothing happens in a vacuum in life. Every action has a series of consequences, and sometimes it takes a long time to fully understand the consequences of our actions. Qualities you need to get through medical school and residency: discipline, patience, perseverance. A willingness to forego sleep, a penchant for sadomasochism, ability to weather crises of faith and self-confidence, accept exhaustion as fact of life, addiction to caffeine, a definite plus unfailing optimism that the end is in sight. I remember reading The Grapes of Wrath in high school in 1983. My family had immigrated to the US 3 years before, and I had spent the better part of the first 2 years learning English. John Steinbeck's book was the first book I read in English where I had an aha moment, namely in the famed turtle chapter. I hate resting, I feel restless, my preference is to be working. In many parts of the world, a man's accusing finger always finds a woman. But I think we need women to solve the problems that men create. Too often, stories about Afghanistan center around the various wars, the opium trade, the war on terrorism. Precious little is said about the Afghan people themselves, their culture, their traditions, how they lived in their country, and how they manage abroad as exiles. Writing for me is largely about rewriting. I'm so fascinated by how people destroy each other and love each other. People find meaning and redemption in the most unusual human connections. When I went to Kabul, weeks after I finished The Kite Runner, I met a lot of people from all walks of life: men, women, children, people from ministries, hotel doormen, shopkeepers. And I learned from them what daily life was like when the rockets were flying overhead. In my 20s, life seemed endless. At 49, I've had a chance to see how dark life can be, and I am far more aware of the constraints of time than when I wrote The Kite Runner. I realize there is only a limited number of things I can do. My books are about ordinary people, like you, me, people on the street, people who really have an expectation of reasonable happiness in life, want their life to have a sense of security and predictability, who want to belong to something bigger than them, who want love and affection in their life, who want a good future for the children. Kabul was very popular with the hippies in the 60s and 70s. It was very quiet and peaceful. In Afghan society, parents play a central role in the lives of their children. The parent-child relationship is fundamental to who you are and what you become and how you perceive yourself, and it is laden with contradictions, with tension, with anger, with love, with loathing, with angst. I am always revolted when Islamic leaders, from Afghanistan or elsewhere, deny the very existence of female oppression, avoid the issue by pointing to examples of what they view as Western mistreatment of women, or even worse, justify the oppression of women on the basis of notions derived from Sharia law. There's nothing easy about writing. It's always difficult. It's always a struggle. I was good at being a doctor, my patients liked me. At times people trust you with things they wouldn't tell their spouses. It was a real privilege. Family is so central to Afghan life that all Afghan stories are family stories. Family is something I simply can't resist because all the great themes of human life, duty, grief, sacrifice, love, envy, you find all those things within families. Reading is an active, imaginative act. It takes work. Afghanistan is a rural nation where 85% of people live in the countryside. And out there it's very, very conservative, very tribal, almost medieval. In Afghanistan, you don't understand yourself solely as an individual. You understand yourself as a son, a brother, a cousin to somebody, an uncle to somebody. You are part of something bigger than yourself. I don't think she is underappreciated, certainly not among writers, but Alice Munro is the classic underappreciated writer among readers. It is almost a cliché now to wonder why this living legend is not more widely read. I'm a pretty uncomplicated person. I live a very simple life with my family and I enjoy very ordinary things. My memories of Kabul are vastly different than the way it is when I go there now. My memories are of the final years before everything changed. When I grew up in Kabul, it couldn't be mistaken for Beirut or Tehran, as it was still in a country that's essentially religious and conservative, but it was surprisingly progressive and liberal. Syria's neighboring countries cannot and should not carry the cost of caring for refugees on their own. The international community must share the burden with them by providing economic aid, investing in development in those countries, and opening their own borders to desperate Syrian families looking for protection. You write because you have an idea in your mind that feels so genuine, so important, so true. And yet, by the time this idea passes through the different filters of your mind, and into your hand, and onto the page or computer screen, it becomes distorted, and it's been diminished. I've been told, and I think I recognize it, that there's a cinematic quality to my writing, with a sense of image and place and scene, and, some would say, my tendency to finish my books the way Hollywood finishes its films. I have a particular disdain for Islamic extremism, and of course, in both The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns that's obvious. I find myself drawn to that period where children are about to leave childhood behind. When you're 12 years old, you still have one foot in childhood, the other is poised to enter a completely new stage of life. Your innocent understanding of the world moves towards something messier and more complicated, and once it does you can never go back. The experience of writing The Kite Runner is one I will always think back on with fondness. There is an energy, a romance in writing the first novel that can never be duplicated again. Write the story you need to tell and want to read. It's impossible to know what others want, so don't waste time trying to guess. All stories I write are compulsive. Anything I've ever written was because I don't have a choice. I write stories because I can't wait to tell it, I can't wait to see how it ends. I spent a lot of winters in my childhood flying kites with my brother, with my cousins, with friends in the neighborhood. It's what we did in the winter. Schools closed down. There was not much to do. Afghan women, as a group, I think their suffering has been equaled by very few other groups in recent world history. A doctor in a hospital told me that when the Mujahideen were fighting in the early 90s, he often performed amputations and caesarean sections without anesthesia because there were no supplies. I entered the literary world, really, from outside. My entire background has been in sciences. I was a biology major in college, then went to medical school. I've never had any formal training in writing. I think that to fully appreciate baseball, it helps to have been born in the US. I give novels as gifts, and there is nothing I like to receive more as a gift. I don't listen to music when I write, I find it distracting. There isn't, even now, a great tradition of novel writing in Afghanistan. Most of the literature is in the form of poetry. When I go to Afghanistan, I realize I've been spared, due to a random genetic lottery, by being born to people who had the means to get out. Every time I go to Afghanistan, I am haunted by that. Literary fiction is kept alive by women. Women read more fiction, period. Whatever the readers feel when they're reading my books, I feel it tenfold when I'm writing it. I think the emancipation of women in Afghanistan has to come from inside, through Afghans themselves, gradually, over time. For a novelist, it's kind of an onerous burden to represent an entire culture. I grew up in a society with a very ancient and strong oral storytelling tradition. I was told stories, as a child, by my grandmother, and my father as well. I lay no claim, it should be clear, to being a historian. So in my books, the intimate and personal have been intertwined inextricably with the broad and historical. My books are love stories at core, really. But I am interested in manifestations of love beyond the traditional romantic notion. In fact, I seem not particularly inclined to write romantic love as a narrative motive or as an easy source of happiness for my characters. It's a very nice kind of quasi-fame being a writer, because you remain largely anonymous and you can have a private life, which I really cherish. I don't like to be in the public light all that much. I don't crave the whole fame thing at all. I will say that there is an inordinate amount of medicine in my novels, especially the first one. There are a lot of medical things that happen. A hip fracture, 3 different kinds of lung cancer, pneumonia, blood poisoning, and so on. Ultimately, my books are not about the politics, although the toil and the struggle and the wars in Afghanistan have a significant impact on the lives of my characters. American high school culture was impenetrable to me, and very cliquey. You had the Hispanics, the African Americans, the surfer guys and the goths and the immigrants. The jocks and the surfers got the girls. By the time I got to grips with it, I'd graduated. My wife is my in-home editor and reads everything I write. The only 2 places where I can read for long stretches are in airplanes and in bed at night time. I read actual physical books and have thus far avoided the electronic lure. Usually in films, when Muslims pray, it's either before or after they've blown something up. A Western-style democracy in Afghanistan is a dream. I don't see that as a reality anytime soon. But I think some form of representative political process is not that far-fetched. For me as a writer, the story has always taken precedence over everything else. I have never sat down to write with broad, sweeping ideas in mind, and certainly never with a specific agenda.